Alan, our venue today is probably the perfect encapsulation of the trajectory of this summer. The last time we met, it was in person at the height of optimism about vaccines. And now with the Delta variant and maybe other variants coming up, we feel like there are fits and starts in the long-awaited reopening. What effect are you seeing this has on the global economy?
Actually, one surprising effect the pandemic has had on the U.S. economy is that it has caused a sustained increase in labor productivity. When recession first takes hold, businesses begin so-called cutting the fat.
Right.
The least productive workers will be culled first, and discretionary spending will be reined in, leaving businesses in a more productive posture in the early periods of a recession, even as aggregate output falls. These gains in productivity are not necessarily permanent, and productivity may revert to trend as the economy recovers. What is both surprising and encouraging to me is that after a year and a half of additional data, productivity has yet to show any signs of giving back the gains made in response to the pandemic. In fact, most recent data for the second quarter of 2021 show real output per hour is at an all-time high. This suggests businesses and their workers have adapted to the working from home environment and that the economy can withstand a reopening that comes in fits and spurts.
Alan, as you said, we are going to be living with COVID, right, for the foreseeable future, and we will continue to have economic disruptions. So if these disruptions become, more commonplace, that will be the new modus operandi for us. What do you see the role of central bankers to be to create economies that are more resilient moving forward to these shocks? Because it's not the last shock we're going to have of this magnitude.
I do not see the job of central banks as one of creating economies. What a central bank can do in times of panic is to ensure ample liquidity in financial markets by acting as the lender of last resort. In response to COVID-19, for example, the Federal Reserve used its emergency lending powers to buy corporate debt for the first time. It's not only prevented the bond markets from freezing, it even allowed some companies to issue new debt in the midst of a pandemic. On the other hand, creating economies more resilient to these shocks is a job I would say falls more to Congress and regulators, not central bankers.
So you're not seeing any change in the role of central bankers as compared to the traditional role. But Alan, putting back your hat, because you have also, before being a central banker, you did a lot of work on forecasting the economy. And if you look now into 2022, what is your forecast for the economy? And do you see some sectors that have been doing well, continuing to do well? Are there areas that you are concerned might struggle? What is your thought right now?
Well, one of the biggest adjustments many had to make in response to the pandemic was working from home. At times it looked as though it would be a very brief phenomenon, especially after we successfully developed the vaccines. It was assumed we would vaccinate, reopen, and everyone would be back to the office. But if recent headlines are any indication, workers are in no rush to return to the office and are even willing to quit their jobs if their newfound flexibility is revoked. Furthermore, the productivity data I alluded to earlier suggest that workers have a point. They need to return to a physical office if they can be just or more productive at home. It would seem that whether or not more variants arise, working from home to some degree will be part of the new normal. This dramatic change in our behavior will continue to benefit the technology sector and presents challenges to commercial real estate as businesses continue to consider how they want to organize their workforces going forward.
It's really interesting because while you do mention that that working from home is a good thing, and you have talked to me privately also about how effective you've been working from home, you've also been in the office many days. I have to tell everyone who is listening to us today that Alan has been at the office many, many days and continues to make sure that he leaves the office later than the rest of us. So much for working remote. He is now a hybrid worker, if I may call you that, Alan. Let me ask you.
I accept it. You may call me anything you want.
So we call you a hybrid worker now. Alan, also, as you were talking about vaccination being, relatively effective, at the same time, if we look at a lot of data out there, including some recent data from Oxford University, there's huge amount of inequality in how vaccines have been distributed, right? You've had more than 5.6 billion doses of COVID vaccines administered so far, and 73 doses per every 100 people on the planet. But those doses have been overwhelmingly in developed countries, and many low-income countries have not got almost any to very few vaccines. So if you look at that level of inequity, and given that people are getting on planes and traveling, what worries you more about this level of inequity in vaccination?
We should absolutely be concerned about this issue. The failings of the COVAX program, logistical issues, and government's own inadequacies are making a bad situation even worse. But it is not as simple as just delivering more vaccines, as many people are reluctant to receive the shots in the first place. So there are complexities surrounding this issue which are not simple to solve. At this point, only 1% of the 1.3 billion vaccines injected around the world have been administered in Africa. And that comparative percentage has been declining in recent weeks. Delays in vaccinating the global population will have serious economic consequences. And economic recovery is not assured even in countries where infections are low, so long as the virus circulates elsewhere. To put some order of magnitude on this conversation, the Economist Intelligence Unit estimates that failing to vaccinate will cost the world economy $2.3 trillion worth of output between 2022 and 2025. That amount of foregone output is roughly equivalent to the GDP of France. Two-thirds of the shortfall will be borne by poorer countries that are not members of the OECD. In absolute terms, Asia will be the worst affected, with a projected loss of $1.7 trillion over 3 years. But it is Africa that will stomach the highest losses as a share of GDP, missing out on 3% of the region's forecast output under a higher vaccination scenario.
As you note, it is a very, very big problem. And a lot of what will happen in the US obviously also depends on what goes on in the rest of the world. But switching back to the US economy, Alan, and obviously in addition to monetary policy, there's a lot of fiscal stimulus and more to come. What opportunities are you seeing in the US in terms of strengthening the economy as we go through this rebuilding phase in the next year or two in the US?
I'd be inclined to see how the economy recovers by itself before constructing new expansionary programs. History indicates that we will recover and do so reasonably well rapidly. I don't know for a fact that that's going to happen because we have so many conflicting problems, especially the virus. But I would be inclined to say that we will see a gradual recovery over the next year. The first thing we have to do is to alleviate inflationary pressures. One of the big drivers behind inflation is the federal debt and our increasing unit money supply. The relationship between unit money supply and the inflation rate has been extraordinarily tight over the last 50 years. Unit money supply will tend to be spurred by increasing federal deficits.
And sort of, staying focused on the U.S., we've seen upwards pressure across all prices and inflation showing itself in many areas. Do you also see that the pressure on wages that is starting to show itself more across different sectors to be something that might impact labor markets, in the sense that the fact that there's already been some wage growth, and given the shortages in some areas, you're going to have more wage growth most likely. Do you see that as impacting, the relationship between capital and labor in the longer term, and potentially reducing labor for other factors in the economy?
I believe companies are always looking at alternatives that are capital-based, or at least they should be. Automation versus manual labor is an investment decision companies have always been confronted with. Increases in wages certainly change the hurdle rate of investment in automation, but this is something executives should be constantly weighing, not just the current environment.
Alan, I was going to ask you this big question that is on many minds right now. As you know, President Biden is considering whether to reappoint Jay Powell for another term as Fed chair. You served as Fed chair under 4 presidents, from President Reagan to President George W. Bush. William Martin served as the Fed chair under 5 presidents. How important is it for economic continuity for a Fed chair to serve another term under a different president?
In my opinion, Ashani, the most important attribute of a Fed chairman and the Federal Reserve as an institution, for that matter, is political independence. Each president has his own criteria regarding the qualifications they would like to see in their appointees. And if they choose to appoint somebody different, it is their right to do so. I believe it's far more important that should a change be made, it be done without political pressure rather than continuity for continuity's sake. A Fed chairman and a Fed Reserve Board that is free to pursue their dual mandate as they see fit is sufficient for economic continuity.
I know I won't get you to say anything more, Alan, on this, so thank you. Let's switch to the other big debate, which is very interesting to the audience, and that is the debate that is going on about China. And we, of course, saw the debate between George Soros and BlackRock on investing in China. They're on two ends of the spectrum, but really investors in the room are looking at staying the course in China, investing more, or reducing their investments. And of course, there is the whole subject of national security, which both US and other democracies have been talking about, as well as Chinese looking at it from their own perspective. You've studied the growth of the Chinese economy for decades, Alan. Where do you see this debate headed?
Well, when China first began to open its economy under Deng Xiaoping, there was broad optimism that the increasing standards of living provided by a free market economy would entice China to also adopt social values shared by the Western democracies. These hopes seem to be on their way to realization as economic progress led to social progress under Deng and his successors. However, I think events that have transpired during the presidency of President Xi Jinping have reminded us that capitalism is an economic system, while democracy is a political system. You can have one without the other. Based on China's saving rate and investment rate, it certainly seems like it will be a formidable challenge to the global hegemony of the United States in the future.
Alan, if I may ask you one question that is also been on the minds of many people involved in the financial sector, and that is the extent of the disruption to the global supply chains that is getting, in fact, not better. And our friend Dan Yergin recently wrote that manufacturing data points are worsening delays into 2022. You talk to some people, they see problems with supply chains even going beyond 2022 to into 2023. What effect do you see this problem having on inflation and the global economy as a whole?
Supply chain disruptions will obviously have a negative impact on the economy and will only further inflationary pressures we are currently seeing and slow our recovery. The global supply crunch is being caused by a few different things. most importantly, increased demand from the post-pandemic economic recovery, distortions in global supply chains caused by the pandemic, stockpiling by businesses around the world, and political disruptions, geopolitical disruptions, I should point out. But part of the answer to this question depends on the virus and how we navigate our way out of this pandemic. If people do not get vaccinated quickly and the threat of mutations persists, I believe we will face continuing supply chain disruptions. And those disruptions will reverberate as a strain on the global economy as a whole.
Thank you so much, Alan, for being together today.
My pleasure.